Good evening, everyone. Welcome again to the Making Democracy Work dinner. I'm Susan Morrison, and I have been on the board for a few years now, and this is a great turnout, and I appreciate everyone coming to give our honoree the respect and acknowledgement that he deserves. I want to recognize our sponsors tonight. Well, that's been done. Okay. But thanks again. You can never thank enough. And I believe I left my notes at the table. I did. I have known Buck Wood since I was in law school, and graduated, and I have admired him through these decades of all of his accomplishments. I worked at the Capitol as an undergrad at UT, and I knew that he had a history already of helping us bring government into the sunshine. This man was a key player in getting the Open Meetings Act and the Open Records Act passed. He is a remarkable expert in so many areas. Election law, school finance. He litigated Edgewood 2, 3, and I think now we're on 7. And he served as the advisor to many comptrollers, including Bullock and John Sharp. He's here tonight with his wife, Trish Conrad, and you might recognize that last name because, yes, she is a relative of Jody's. And his son, Brendan, came from Austin to be here tonight. He raised 2 attorney sons and a daughter while he was doing all this public policy work. He's also a trial attorney and has taken dozens of cases to the Supreme Court. He's going to tell us just a couple of stories because you know he's got a bunch of them. And he gives credit to the Ford Foundation for starting him off on this path because they gave him a fellowship to study the Texas legislature. And he's never stopped studying it since, and representing all kinds of people, from judges who are in trouble to politicians and other lawyers, and he has had just a remarkable career, and he's not finished. He is still practicing law, and I think that common cause experience in his youth, he has kept up throughout his representation to make Texas a better place and make democracy work in Texas. Please welcome Buck Wood. Thank you, Buck.
Thank you.
I know we're going to give you a certificate when you get finished, but I have to show everybody because I know he has a lot of plaques on his wall and degrees and all that. But I thought, what can you give someone who has everything and he's just a kick-ass lawyer? Well, he needs a knocker with sterling silver spurs. Keep knocking.
I was born and raised on what we used to call a dirt farm in East Texas. My mom and dad did not have any money, really. And I had a brother and 3 sisters. And I was asked one time when they diagnosed me with bladder cancer, did I ever smoke? And I said, no, I never smoked. They said, well, that's weird. Have you ever been around inhalants like benzene and things like that? And I said, no. As soon as I got off the farm, manual labor was not in my not in my sights. And it just turned out I'd been around a lot of secondhand smoke. But Ford Foundation gave me a fellowship when I was at the end of my first year of law school. And it changed my life. I mean, sometimes you can look back and say, okay, this did or that did or whatever, but there's no question about what happened there. The Ford Foundation decided that they wanted to try to generate some people with some experience, an education in legislation. And they did this in legislatures across the country, but the very first one was in, amazingly enough, Texas. Back then, Texas welcomed it. And because of that, I got to spend time in the legislature. I got to spend time in the Senate, in the House. Not loud enough? I can get really loud. I spent time in the governor's office, the Secretary of State's office, and I got to know practically every House member, and I got to know all the Senate members. And so when I finally graduated from law school, I took a job in the Secretary of State's office, which I had interned in. And about a year later, the Secretary of State called me and said that, Buck, I want you to take over the job of Director of Elections for the state of Texas. And even though my family had been very political, and my mother lived to be 95 years old, and she said she had never missed voting in an election since she had been allowed to vote in elections. I learned early on that voting is a learned habit. It's not something that comes natural. It's the reason we have such low participation among young people, because they're not in the habit. Well, I was never allowed not to be in the habit. That was just not allowed. When I was at the University of Texas going to school, I made sure I applied for my absentee ballot, because my mother would ask me, did you apply for your absentee ballot? But I want to, and I've worked with the League of Women Voters representatives in the legislature since I was Director of Elections in 1969. I'll be 74 here in a few months. I'm still trying lawsuits. I'm still trying election lawsuits. Of course, I've tried so many different types of lawsuits, it's unbelievable. I had somebody ask me one time, well, what lawsuits haven't you tried? And I said, well, I've never tried an adoption by estoppel. It exists, it's a case. And I've never tried a Wilderness Estates case, because I took Wilderness Estates when I was in law school, and it was the most boring thing I've ever taken. And I didn't like law school, but when I got into private practice, I found out I really liked it. It's stressful, but it's fun. And so I've been trying lawsuits for 45 years. Well, either witnessing or trying lawsuits for almost 45 years. Because of my detour into elections work, I got into areas that the League of Women Voters were very interested in. Now, when I was introduced, it was talked about Common Cause. Well, Common Cause came and hired me away from the Secretary of State's office when I was Director of Elections, because they wanted to pass a whole package of bills, which we did. This was in the wake of the Sharpstown scandals. Maybe most of you don't remember the Sharpstown scandals, but and in 1973, we had 5 bills: an ethics bill, campaign finance, open records, open meetings, and lobby disclosure. And we passed all of them. Well, we'd had a turnover between 71 and 73 that you would not believe. Well, it will happen again, but I'm not sure it's going to happen again this year. But in any case, we had a real serious turnover. Well, Lieutenant Governor Hobby really didn't like me very much. He was all for the open records and the open meetings bill, but when the Ethics Commission bill came up, for some reason or other, he didn't like it. And so we passed the bill, we just didn't get a commission to enforce it. In 1982, totally to my surprise, he appointed me to the commission to revise the election code. And having had experience in the Secretary of State's office, obviously, and then afterwards, and I had been trying election law cases before that, there was one thing that really bothered me, and that was, in Texas at that time, if you were a convicted felon, you could never vote again. Never. Well, I went to work on that, and I take full credit for it. I'm not bragging. It took 3 sessions. The first session, I got it lowered to 5 years after you were conviction. You were a felon, you could go back to voting. Then I got it lowered to 2 years, the next session. Because my feeling was this: if somebody has been convicted of a crime like that, what do we want them to do when they get out? We want them to participate. We want them to get involved. And I kept making that point. I got it down to 2 years, and then finally we had a cleanup bill in 1987, and I got it down to time served. And nobody else was paying hardly any attention to it, but I'd been getting letters, phone calls from people in jail that hadn't even been convicted yet, and they wouldn't give them they wouldn't give them a mail-in ballot. And we fixed all that. But it was one of those things that took time in the legislature. You just had to keep pounding away until finally you got it. And it was I felt very good about it. And I still get complaints from people who are in jail, and some of them are not even in jail for felonies. They're in jail and they won't mail them a ballot. During all these years, I've tried dozens and dozens of election law cases. I don't know how many. One time I did keep account for a while, and I'd appeared in 100 courthouses in Texas on one matter or the other. But then I got involved in school finance, and that's been very rewarding for me. I've still doing election law cases. I got 3 election law cases right now. One of them we just finished, got dismissed last week in Dallas. The school finance situation was in horrible shape. And I didn't get directly involved until the Edgewood 2 case. And that was the Edgewood 1 case. I was involved with the lawyers involved with it, but I was not a counsel of record. In Edgewood 2, by that time, the Equity Center, and you may not know what the Equity Center is, but it is an organization of average to poor wealth districts. And now they total more than 600 members. And we've only got 1,000 school districts, a little over 1,000. And so I took that as something that we needed to really do something about. And the legislature had made 3 efforts to comply with the Supreme Court's decision, and in each one of those efforts, the Supreme Court said, "You're not there yet." I had been Bob Bullock's second in command in the controller's office. He was a friend. I met him when he was Secretary of State, when I was in the Secretary of State's office. And you never quit working for Bob Bullock. I left his office and went into private practice, much to being berated by him in 1977. Well, in 1983, the Supreme Court once again threw out another one of the school finance bills because they simply weren't equitable. And this is the way Bullock operated. I mean, like I said, you never quit being his lawyer. He was right after the Supreme Court decision came down. I get a call at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, and this was getting close to the end of the session. And Bob said, Buck, I want you to get with another guy in my office. I'm one of my assistants, Jim Shearer, and I want a constitutional school finance bill on my desk Tuesday. Now, one of the things, having worked for him for all those years, he got things done in months that sometimes took years for somebody else to do, because that's the kind of pressure he put on you. Well, obviously I was familiar because I'd been a lawyer in these cases and everything. And I picked up the phone and called my associate in the office, Jim Shearer, and I said, Jim, I just got a call from Bullock. He wants a constitutional school finance bill that the Supreme Court will approve on Tuesday. This is Saturday morning. I went over to his house and we sat down, and it's amazing what you can do when you have that much pressure on you. It really is. If you have to do it, and you got to do it fast, you can think. Now, some people, that stresses them out, but if you're going to try lawsuits, you got to get over stress, because that's constant. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, we had a plan. Now, it was just an outline of a plan, but it was a plan. By Sunday afternoon, we had a complete outline of the plan, including the intricacies that we needed to have addressed. On Monday, we actually drafted a bill. Now, this is all within 3 days. And he told me, he said, I want you to meet with Senator Ratliff on Tuesday and lay this out. That was from Saturday morning to Tuesday. We were there and laid it out. And Bullock immediately called the dean of the UT Law School and said, I want you and your team, I want you to go over this. And I want to answer Thursday. Give it a day and a half. And they came back and said, we think this will work. We kicked it out in the Senate immediately because Senator Ratliff was the chairman of the Education Committee, and he was right involved in the last few days. At least he knew what it was about. We got over to the House, and Pete Lane had been elected Speaker at that point. And we started having some, not problems with Speaker Laney, we just had some new ideas about how this could be done. And I was very worried that what we were going to do is mess up our plan. And Texas Education Agency had a lawyer who was a good friend of mine. His name was Kevin O'Hanlon. And he came over and came up with an alternative, which I was very disturbed about. I wasn't mad at Kevin, and he said, well, why don't we just make it optional? You can go this way or you can go this way. Well, I was quite sure that the Supreme Court would not approve of his idea. But if you're going to say, take your pick, and the pick you picked is not constitutional, then you're stuck with the other one. So within less than 2 weeks, we drafted, completely developed, researched, and passed a school finance bill, and the Supreme Court approved of it the next year. And I've been involved in every school finance case since then. But I have never, ever quit working on making sure that people who want to vote, who are entitled to vote, or if they're not entitled to vote, they don't get to vote. And it has been an extremely exciting and rewarding 45 years worth of practice. And I've got two election lawsuits that are active right now. Now, I'll tell you, I didn't make my money on election lawsuits. It's seasonal. But our firm's done really well in other areas, so, you know, I can afford to do it. And I'll have to retire here soon. I mean, there's hardly any trial lawyers that are really active trial lawyers that are of my age. It's a young person's game, or at least a middle-aged person's game. You eventually, you get short-term memory problems or whatever. You got to quit at some point. But I'm not quite there yet. And I am so honored to be honored by the League of Women Voters, because they've been involved in things that I've been involved in since I was, you know, in law school. And I'll celebrate my 50th anniversary graduation from law school in June. And so I'm still doing it. I still like it. One of my election law cases is in Beaumont, and the other one that's still active is in Longview. And you can't get to either one of those places by plane unless you charter. So driving 4.5 hours to Beaumont is not a lot of fun, but it has to get done. And there'll come a time when I can't do it, and hopefully I recognize it. There are only 4 lawyers in Austin, Texas, that graduated with me in '68 that are still practicing trying cases. Only 4. And but I'm gonna string it out as long as I can. I have some younger lawyers. They're not as young now as when I named them. I said, look, I've seen too many lawyers get old, and they're in court, and they're trying to represent a client, and they're not doing a very good job of it because they're old. I mean, you gotta admit, at some point in time, you run down. And I said, what I want you to do, you see me in court all the time, I want you to come tell me if you see me losing a step or two. Well, now some of those people are already retired. And so, but that's what I want. I have other lawyers that see me in court all the time. And I have a law partner and assistants and so forth, and I'm telling them, when they see me not being able to do what I should be able to do, they got to tell me, and I'll quit. But I like what I do. And some of them ask me, Buck, why are you still practicing? I said, well, first of all, what would I do when I get up in the morning? I don't go to the office. I mean, you know. And second of all, I'm still doing well. But this honor, it means a lot to me. When it was talked to me about last year, I was really looking forward to it, and I'm really, really honored, because your values as far as voting and participation in democracy are totally shared by me. I can't ever remember anything that the League of Women Voters wanted to do and related to voting rights that I disagreed with. So thank you.
Stay up here for a minute and let me give you this flag. And just look at everybody and let that sink in, because they love you.
And I love them.
So here's your Defending Democracy Award, signed by the President. And it can go with your others, along with your
My
spur knocker.
Well, one of the things somebody brought up, that on your program there's a picture of me, and it's a little old. I don't have quite as much hair as I did then. But they said, boy, you look mean in that picture. And I said, that's the way I try lawsuits. I want the other side to understand that I'm intending to win this lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I appreciate it more than you know. Thank y'all.
And I'll bring this back to the table for you.
Yes, please.
I just have to say a few more things. Well, Buck and his law firm have been loyal supporters of the league throughout the years, and he did and still holds the record for the highest judgment against the state of Texas, $183 million, when the state was shorting school districts by using the wrong calculation in the local option for homestead exemptions. He made him pay. And that has helped those school districts every year since. And I know some of you here are just waiting to show your support for the league, especially if the dinner is the only thing you have been privy to during our convention. And if you want to, and we want you to, write a check, give a donation. There are envelopes on your table so that we can do the good work of the league. So if you don't have an envelope, please see me. Most of the programs have them inside, and we would appreciate any amount that you would like to give. If you make your check out to the Texas LWVTX TEF for the Ed Fund, it's TEF for Texas Education Fund. That will be a nonprofit donation that you can write off until, I guess, next year. And otherwise, if you want it to go to our operating, you can just say Texas League of Women Voters of Texas, and we would appreciate any amount. Thank you so much for coming. We love Buck Wood and all the work he's done. He loves the league, and I hope if you haven't met him and his wife, you will come up and do so before you leave tonight. Thank you so much.